Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, October the 27th, 2025. So today is John Cleese's birthday, and he is going to be, or is, 86. And I know that in my videos I don't particularly like covering the horoscopes of celebrities, but the advantage of John Cleese is that a lot of people know about him. I don't have to tell you who he is. We know about Monty Python and the life of Brian and so on. So it's an easy chart to look at in that sense. And it might be surprising, perhaps, that he is a Scorpio. And yes, it is his birthday. He's got his sun at the beginning of Scorpio. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to look at the chart of a comedian. That's not something I don't think I've done before. What is it about a chart that makes someone a comedian? And perhaps one also has to consider the particular type of comedy someone is involved in. I also want to look at the horoscope of the first showing of Monty Python on October the 5th, 1969. Another point I want to make is if you haven't got enough of me, I did do an interview a couple of days ago for a sort of new podcast called The Eighth House Portal. And in this interview with Annalene, I talked about the fourth house, and in particular the IC. So if you want to see me talking about the IC, being interviewed about the IC by Annalene, then I'm going to give you the link to the YouTube video, and I'll do that. I'll give you that link in the linked, in sorry, the what do you call it? The pinned comment on this video. So let me start off by looking at the astrology and I Ching for today. So here is the chart for today, Monday, October the 27th. And by the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So the moon is in Capricorn. Moon is at 11 Capricorn at noon on Monday, October the 27th, set for New York. And, we can say the normal stuff about the moon in Capricorn. Yeah, the moon in Capricorn is fallen, because the moon rules Cancer. And so in some respects, it's not a great place for the moon to be in, particularly by day. By night, it's not so bad because the moon does rule the earthy triplicity by night, because Venus rules it by day. So perhaps after dark, after dusk, things are going to be easier than during the daylight. Now, the moon makes a sextile aspect to the sun. Okay. Now, if you're in the Americas, that's going to be very much separating. So we got the sun at 4 degrees Scorpio at noon, and then noon New York time, and then the moon at 11 Capricorn. So it's a long way off, you could say, but the signs Scorpio and Capricorn do have a certain sympathy with one another, and so I think that sextile, even if it is quite wide, may say something about the day. It might create a degree of calmness. There's not necessarily so much going on. At least astrologically, though I'm sure there are tons of things going on, but astrologically, really, that sextile between the moon and the sun is really all there is. And aside from that, the sun is still making a square to Pluto. It's not an exact square to Pluto, but it's still there. And it's 3-degree orb. So we can say the usual things about Sun square Scorpio, that there can be a degree of struggle, who is in control, and some of us might be taking ourselves very seriously. And aside from that, Mercury, remembers, getting very, very late in the sign. It's now past sort of 28 Scorpio, so very soon Mercury is going to be in Sagittarius. So that is a big change coming up. Mercury moving from a water sign into a fire sign. And Mercury is making a trine to Saturn. Again, it's not an exact trine to Saturn. We still have the remnants of that Mercury grand trine. So Mercury is still making a trine to Jupiter, still making a trine to Saturn. So we've still got a kind of grand trine in water, and we've got another grand trine starting to form. We have got a grand trine between Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. In fact, that Mars Jupiter Saturn grand trine, although it's not exact, it's still a bit early, it may say a lot about today. I mean, Mars is very close to the trine of Jupiter, and so I would have said that today we're definitely going to be feeling it. And so if you think about Mars trine Jupiter, you think about energy, Mars, Jupiter, knowing no limits. And once we get involved in something, it may be difficult to stop, and that could be a good or a bad thing. It depends on the situation. But it's going to be easy, perhaps, with that Mars trine Jupiter to keep going, but particularly on an emotional level. This is a grand trine in water signs. So grand trine, I mean, yeah, it is a grand trine in water signs. That Mars Jupiter trine is particularly exact, but a grand trine and trines in general in water signs are going to be different than, for example, fire or air signs. They're perhaps going to be more passive, more understated, and there'll be action taking place under the surface. Mars trine Jupiter, many of us will have powerful feelings, and we're going to be aware of it, and we're also going to be aware perhaps of how we can get carried away by our feelings. So those are some thoughts about Mars trine Jupiter, and when I do my forecast of the 12 signs, I'm sure I will be talking about how this trine might be having an influence on us. I mean, not for all of the signs, but certainly for some of them. But as far as the specifics of the grand trine involving Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, I'll be talking about that. Certainly not in detail in this video, but in the video for tomorrow and the day after. So that's the picture in New York. If we move to Sydney, Australia, the moon is going to be earlier in the sign at noon on October 27, 2025. So the moon will be at 4 degrees. 4 degrees Capricorn. Now that means that if you are in Australia or New Zealand or Vladivostok, then the moon sextile sun that I was talking about earlier is going to be that much closer. It's going to be that much more important. And I do think that the moon sextile sun is an entirely harmonious aspect. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand, there could be a feeling of harmony, and it may be a good time to get on with people, in quite a passive way. It's not like anything has to be done or anything has to be said, but when you've got the sun and the moon in sextile, it just makes relationships in general that much smoother. And then we have the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So here is the chart for that. So the Earth is still pretty close to the square of Pluto. So there is the Earth at 4 degrees Taurus. Remember, the Earth is always opposition to Sun. You've got the Sun at 4 degrees Scorpio. Therefore, the Earth will be at 4 degrees Taurus, and the Earth is square Pluto. So a lot of what I said about Sun square Pluto, applies in pretty much the same way with Earth square Pluto. How do we feel on our planet? We might feel that things are difficult, or at least that things are heavy, that there are things out there that need to be taken seriously. And Mercury was a few days ago conjunct Pluto. Now Mercury is moving on. Remember, Mercury heliocentrically moves very quickly. So that Mercury-Pluto conjunction has kind of broken up. I mean, we might still feel it to some small extent. It's all part of the Sun square Pluto, so Sun square Pluto, Mercury conjunct Pluto. So, it is about what we're thinking about, and, do we have enough power? Do we have enough control? If we say something, is that really the right thing to do? So, those are a few thoughts about what's going on. I mean, overall, I wouldn't say that the heliocentric picture today is especially dramatic. So now it's time to look at things from the perspective of the 12 signs. Remember, there isn't a great deal going on today. I mean, not directly. Yeah, there is that Mars trine Jupiter, but it's not exact until tomorrow. So it's possible that some of my interpretations for the 12 signs will be shorter than usual. Anyway, these are my forecasts for today, which is Monday, October the 27th, 2025. Aries, you probably have quite a lot of control at the moment. And, part of the reason you have control, or a fair amount of control, is because there isn't a great deal of pressure on you. There's nothing that you have to do. There's nothing that has to happen. And so what is it, Aries, that you want to get on with? Now, the moon is in Capricorn. And, with the moon in Capricorn in a cardinal sign, that means that many Arians, although they don't feel obliged to do anything, they might nonetheless feel that there's something that they should be doing. And perhaps, Aries, you'll be thinking about your ambitions. What is it that you would like to do? What's important to you, right now? And I think that this might have been something that's been sort of building up since the weekend, since late on Sunday, and now on Monday, you're thinking about what does need to be done. And there's no need to announce it, I don't think. There's no need to be too aggressive about it. Think about yourself and what you can do, and you don't have to tell the whole world. You can just decide what is important. And the moon in Capricorn is making a sextile to the sun, and this moon sextile sun, okay, it's particularly strong if you're in Australia or New Zealand. It may not be so powerful if you're in the Americas, but I think you still feel it. And the sextile between the moon and the sun could have an emotional dimension, perhaps because you want to work at the emotional level, feeling things through and getting an emotional impression of what is the best way to proceed. I mean, there are other types of impressions, but as I've been saying on a fairly regular level, if you've been listening to my horoscopes over the last month, I've sort of on and off been perhaps complaining on the behalf of the fire signs, that there aren't any planets in fire signs. And that is true. We've just had Moon in Sagittarius over the weekend, so that was good, having Moon in Sagittarius. But now the Moon has gone into Capricorn, and so that's why it may be just difficult to work on the normal Aries level, and you have to perhaps work on other levels, including your emotions, and perhaps being in a position where you have to wait and feel rather than act, and that's perhaps not something you're entirely comfortable with. Fortunately, Mercury is about to change signs. So Mercury is at 28 Scorpio. So in a couple of days' time, Mercury will be in Sagittarius, and so you will have a planet in Sagittarius for quite some time. Although we shouldn't forget that Mercury does go retrograde. So Mercury moves into Sagittarius, I think, in a couple of days' time. Let me tell you when. It So Mercury moves into Sagittarius on the 29th. So Mercury moves into Sagittarius on Wednesday. Now, because of retrograde motion, it does in the end move back into Scorpio, but not until November the 19th. And of course, by November the 19th, the Sun is getting ready to move into Sagittarius. So this sort of, I don't know what's the right word, this drought of fire, that doesn't sound right, drought of fire, but this lack of fire is not going to last so much longer. And I think that, with Mercury moving into Sagittarius on Wednesday, I think that things are changing. So if you are feeling perhaps a little uninspired and you're not quite sure where things are going, you just don't have that normal Aries energy, you really shouldn't worry, because things really are about to change. And perhaps it was necessary, what you've been going through. Perhaps you needed a bit of reflection. You can't just be constantly acting down to you to take the initiative, always down to you. That can be exhausting. But still, as I said at the beginning, I think today there are things you want to get going on, and if something is important to you, and if you do want to make an impression in any particular area, you can. And of course, one aspect that absolutely should not be neglected is a trine between Mars and Jupiter. So, Mars is your ruler. Mars is about to become really very prominent in a way, because Mars makes a trine to Jupiter, then it makes a trine to Saturn. So that Mars trine Jupiter, okay, it is in water signs, and it may be working on quite an inner level, but it should be quite motivating and even quite exciting. Jupiter's in a great position. It's exalted in Cancer. So with this Mars trine Jupiter, you're beginning to feel that you can do things. You're starting to be aware of possibilities. And even though Mercury hasn't yet gone into Sagittarius, you know that things are changing, and I think deep down that things are about to change for the better. Taurus, there is no need to just stay in one place. I mean, I'm thinking particularly on a sort of spiritual and inspirational level. You might physically be in one place, but you can at the same time be in many different places, and you can be imagining yourself doing different things, being somewhere completely different. And don't feel, Taurus, that you've necessarily got all the answers, that you have experienced everything that there is to be experienced, because as we all know, that can't possibly be true. And right now, you can not only experience the new, but you can also find ways of benefiting from it. You can actually take something that is new, an original, something that you don't necessarily fully understand, but you can take it and you can fit it into your life in such a way that it works. And personal benefit may very much be part of it. You should, and I think it's absolutely reasonable at the moment, to be thinking about your best interests, perhaps your financial best interests, crude as that might sound, but something new and something that you don't fully understand can actually represent the future and can represent a prosperous future. And so if you are thinking about money and your own financial future, I think it's important not to be narrow-minded, and do be aware of new possibilities, and also be aware that you are not alone. I mean, the moon is making a sextile to the sun. Okay, this sextile between the moon and the sun might be especially strong in Australia and New Zealand, but everyone is feeling it wherever you are, especially there aren't really any other aspects today. There aren't any really exact aspects today. But there is that Mars trine Jupiter, but I'll talk about that in a moment. But that moon sextile sun means that something that is perhaps out of your normal range can be incorporated, as I've already said, and perhaps it can be incorporated with another person's help. So you don't have to feel, Taurus, that you need to do everything on your own, especially as Mars is making a trine to Jupiter. So this trine between Mars and Jupiter, it's exact tomorrow, but it's quite powerful, and you're already starting to feel it. And as far as how you might feel Mars trine Jupiter, well, it could say something about other people. It's not necessarily something you need to deal with on your own, and it could be that other people are more enthusiastic than you. Maybe they've got the energy and you haven't. I mean, I think you've got a fair amount of energy. You've got enough energy, but really to see things through, you might need another person's enthusiasm. And don't forget that Mars is starting to make a grand trine. So tomorrow there's the exact Mars trine Jupiter, and I think a day or two after that we've got Mars trine Saturn. So Mars is very much in focus, and Mars is in your seventh house, and it's in the seventh house because it's in the opposite house to your sign Taurus, and so Mars making that grand trine really does mean that there is a lot of power and energy flying around you, but that energy may be focused on another person. So it might be another person who's providing the encouragement and support. And yeah, I don't think it's a time where you necessarily have to feel that it's all down to you. And so, especially as you've got Sun, Mars, and Mercury in your opposite sign. So be open to many possibilities, and don't think you've got all the answers. You can find some answers for yourself, some new answers, and then it's quite possible that other people can help. And so if you handle things right, then I think that today could be quite useful, and things should be starting to move. And yeah, don't get stuck in any one particular mindset, because that would not be helpful. Gemini. Right now, Gemini, it's possible that you might be cautious. You don't feel that you understand everything. There are some things that just are beyond you. And perhaps they're beyond you not because there's anything wrong with you, or because you haven't got the capacity to understand. It's just that things may be working on a level that you yourself are not entirely familiar with, and what's needed on your part is perhaps time. I think time really does matter. I think it's going to take you perhaps longer than usual to really understand what's going on. So don't feel, Gemini, that you have to come up with instant solutions. You can see the problem, you can see what might have to be done, but your first impulse is unlikely to work out. It's not even that your impulse is wrong, it's just your impulse just might not have enough support, might not have enough energy. So do make sure that you're not being pushed. You could be pushed by yourself to get things done. You could be pushed by other people, but I really would not recommend this course of action. And additionally, Gemini, you are in a process of change. because Mercury is now in late Scorpio, very late Scorpio. I think Mercury moves into Sagittarius on Wednesday, 2 days' time. So Mercury moving into Sagittarius, that is a big change. I mean, it is a change that I'll be talking about in detail probably in my forecast for Wednesday. But maybe we should think not about Mercury being in Scorpio, but rather the fact that, Mercury in Sagittarius, because it's not there yet. We should be thinking about Mercury in late Scorpio and what that all means. And so it could be with Mercury in very late Scorpio, Gemini, that there are just things that need to be wrapped up. And if things need to be wrapped up, then Gemini, you should perhaps be thinking more about the past and the present than the future. Things from the past, obligations from the past, promises from the past. You might have made some promises, not just to other people, but perhaps to yourself as well. And Gemini, you are quite good, all things being equal, at breaking promises. I mean, not in a bad way, but you have a lot of good intentions. It comes from the ideas. You have this idea. Wouldn't it be good to do this? And you may even tell people you're going to do this, and time comes along and it just doesn't come together. Or you try and everything takes longer than expected, and you can't see it through. And it's strange when one breaks promises, particularly if you're a Gemini, that you think when you break a promise that the blame comes from other people. You're accused of being unreliable. You're accused of being a flake. But I think very often other people don't notice, and it may be you yourself that notices that you've broken promises. And so maybe that's how you feel. You've perhaps broken promises to yourself. And if you are in that position, then with Mercury moving through very late Scorpio, remember, Scorpio is a reliable sign. It's a fixed sign. It does like to honor its word. So, over the next day or two, make sure, or at least try to make sure, but all your promises are honored. I mean, okay, you might have made promised things which were completely unreasonable, obviously, in which case you can just forget about them probably. But if there's something that you feel you should be doing, then Gemini, now is your chance. Okay, it might not be exciting or glamorous. In fact, it won't be exciting or glamorous. But the point is, you can see it through. You really can. And you're helped by the fact that Mars is making a trine to Jupiter. Okay, that Mars trine Jupiter is exact tomorrow, but it's still very much present. And it could be, Gemini, that if you're prepared to really work at something, to really push yourself, it just won't be as difficult as you'd imagined. And at the same time, it won't be as difficult as you'd imagined to get the rewards. And perhaps you didn't think you were going to get rewarded. Perhaps you didn't see the benefit. But if you are able to make the moves, if you are able to just keep going at something and just have the inner discipline to see it through, then I think that you could be pleasantly surprised by the results. So Gemini, it's kind of what you make of it today. I mean, today could just be a nothing. It just could be nothing going on. It could be just a completely uneventful day. It could be unsatisfactory, and that's the way it could be. But if you just think about what you committed to yourself, if you think about what you would like to do, what you would like to make happen, again, it's not about excitement. It's about doing things from the past, things that you should have done ages ago. You may have moved on from the past. Geminis like to move quickly, but sometimes it's a good time to just hang back and make sure that all your commitments and promises have all been honored where it is reasonable. Yeah, if you've made an unreasonable promise to yourself or to others, well, of course, that's fine. You don't have to do it. But if it's something that just makes you feel guilty, you keep thinking about it, then why Why persist with the misery and the agony and perhaps even disappointment? Because you can make it happen if you put in the effort. Cancer. There is the moon we have to talk about. I mean, the moon is probably the main thing to talk about because there's not a huge amount going on today. Okay, there is Mars trine Jupiter. That is okay. Maybe it's a Mars trine Jupiter that really matters. But as far as the moon is concerned, the moon is in Capricorn, and the moon isn't doing a great deal in Capricorn. But when the moon is in Capricorn, in your opposite sign, or your opposite sign, that can be a time, Cancer, when you are aware that you're not necessarily in full control. That there are other people that sometimes have to be considered, and I don't think it's much of a problem. It's not like it's going to be exhausting. I think it's just a day when you just have to be aware of other people's presence. Provide some basic level of recognition. I mean that's all that's required, and just consider how another person could influence you, and if that influence strikes you as being a good thing, then you can make allowances. If it's a bad thing, well, perhaps that's a situation you can avoid, or you can negotiate your way around it. Now, aside from the moon being in Capricorn, we do have the Mars trine Jupiter. In fact, it's starting to make a trine to Saturn as well. So Mars trine Jupiter is a powerful aspect. And Mars is in Scorpio and Jupiter is in Cancer. And so this aspect, which I think is exact tomorrow, could for you be very motivating. It can really help you to get things done, and it's a trine. So if you're talking about trines, you're talking about things that can happen easily. And with Mars in a part of your horoscope which really is very fortunate in Scorpio. I mean, Scorpio is a sign that you just have a natural affinity with, and so with Mars in Scorpio, you're at a time when you really can be yourself, express yourself. You can be energetic, and with Mars trine Jupiter, you can be incredibly energetic, just enthusiastic. When I say energetic, I'm not saying that you have to be doing crazy stuff, climbing mountains, flying around the place, doing dangerous things. I mean, you could do dangerous things. I'm not suggesting you do, because Mars trine Jupiter, it sounds good, but there is a dangerous side to Mars trine Jupiter, because you could say that Mars, as an aggressive, accident-prone planet, could be pushed by Jupiter to take things too far. So, okay, that is a possibility. But I think that for most Cancerians who are not used to doing dangerous things, it can just be a way of feeling good about your own situation and feeling power. And maybe that's what this Mars trine Jupiter is all about. You need to perhaps demonstrate to yourself that you really can make something happen. And perhaps a demonstration is needed, a small demonstration. It's like a challenge. Can you make something happen? Something that you thought was perhaps slightly difficult, and just see what happens. Try to persuade someone about something, maybe about an idea, but it could be that you can really be someone who is encouraging. And this all links with not just Mars trine Saturn, but the fact that we've got Mars trine Jupiter, we've got Mars trine Saturn, so we've got a grand trine in water signs over the next couple of days. And so we're in this grand trine zone, and because you're a Cancer, you really are able to benefit from this energy, and it may just be lucky. I mean, you can get things moving. You can create the spark almost. I mean, a spark is perhaps the wrong word to use because we're dealing with a grand trine in water signs, but you can create a good feeling about a particular activity or an idea. And if you feel good about something, you can get other people to feel good about it as well. And also, you can create a structure around it. And perhaps that's what really matters. It's not just about having the idea, starting something off. It's about making it real, making it permanent. And this perhaps can be done with other people's help, as you might see, over the next couple of days. I mean, Mars is starting to make a trine to Saturn, and with Mars trine Saturn, that might indicate that if you can persuade other people, if you can get other people involved with whatever's important to you, then you can really feel that you feel that you're not alone, and then perhaps that feeds back into Moon in Capricorn. So I talked about Moon being in Capricorn at the beginning of this piece, and so Moon in Capricorn in your opposite sign can represent another person, and I was rather sort of non-committal about what that Moon in Capricorn might mean. I was, okay, it's about other people, but is it good or is it bad? Well, I think it's probably good when you look at the overall picture. And, it could be that your interests and other people's interests, they just align, and they sort of naturally align. There's no struggle, there's no competition, just everyone is moving in the right direction, and even the same direction. And you needn't worry about it, because it does seem that, in the end, everyone can be happy. And perhaps that's the nature of a grand trine in water signs. Leo, you still feel that things are a bit heavy, that you do have to think about yourself and your own priorities, and it's difficult to look out, to look around you, to think about new possibilities, perhaps to do something you've never done before. That can be difficult. I mean, there were some sparks over the weekend, when the moon was in Sagittarius, but the moon is no longer in Sagittarius. It's now in Capricorn, and so that might mean that you're really thinking about things, on your own terms, and it's difficult to be sort of completely open-minded. I mean, you'd love to be open-minded, and you can be open-minded, but right now that is not entirely easy, and perhaps not helped by the fact that the sun is still making a square to Pluto. So the sun is in Scorpio. The sun is your ruler. It's square Pluto, and so as far as you're concerned, it is a heavy world out there. Things can happen, and the further you move from your own base, whatever that base might be, the more difficult things are, the more likely it is that things might go wrong. But why should they go wrong? You might perceive them as possibly going wrong because you just don't understand what's going on. It just doesn't seem clear. And so that's the way you might be seeing things. And I think there is an element of truth in your perceptions. I don't think that now is a time for taking huge risks or for taking on something that is completely new. And also, Leo, you perhaps should be thinking about your inner world. There is a grand trine starting to form between Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and this grand trine is in water signs. It's in parts of your horoscope that that are quite introspective and inward looking. Nothing wrong with being introspective, nothing wrong with being inward looking, but you're seeing things in terms of yourself and your unconscious, and it's just difficult to move beyond, your particular sphere of interest and your comfort zone. And that's just about the way things work. It's about natural cycles, and you just need to accept things as they are right now and just know that things are going to change. Things are inevitably going to change. I mean, for example, there's been this big emphasis in Scorpio. Still, you've got these 3 planets in Scorpio, but it's not going to last so much longer. Mercury is in late Scorpio, and I think on Wednesday, Mercury moves into Sagittarius. So that is a big change, and I think you're going to find in a couple of days' time, when Mercury moves into Sagittarius, that things are going to be easier. There's going to be more room for action. It's going to be easier to do something different, to do something that you find to be satisfying. But just right now, you're not in the mood, and perhaps, Leo, if you want to be constructive, just focus on what is around you. Perhaps there are things to do in your home that you've delayed them. You thought it wasn't important, but now's your chance. Because if you wait, for example, if you wait until Mercury in Sagittarius, well, things might change. Yeah, things could be more exciting, but if things are more exciting, if there's more action, then there are more distractions, and perhaps you have a chance now to attend to something. And if you don't do it now, things will move on and you might miss your chance. So it's very important to just use the energies as they are, not try to make things, make something that just can't be, or try to sort of jump the gun. Don't worry too much about the future, and perhaps see whatever's going on now as just being an opportunity to ground yourself and to focus on things that are important. And if you do that, I don't think that today should be too bad. Virgo, you're starting to become aware of a change. Something is moving, something is about to shift, and that might mean that you have moments of uncertainty. You would perhaps like to commit yourself to something, but at the same time, you're not sure about it. If you were to commit yourself to something now, then you might find that very soon things change, and you kind of would have to go back to the drawing board. And I think that this approach is, absolutely correct. You can't assume that things will just go on forever in the same old way. And perhaps, Virgo, it is a good time to just see how things turn out, over the next couple of days. Don't feel that you have to commit yourself to any particular future course of action. Just see how things turn out, and see what other people are saying, what other people are thinking, because right now, Virgo, I think your ability to get on with people and to get them to like you and to be able to relate to them is pretty good, although you might not recognize this. So if you feel that you don't want to take any social initiatives, then ask yourself why. Maybe you're just afraid of something. You don't want to get involved in another person's problem. Just more people, more issues. But I think you should try to have, if possible, a fairly constructive attitude to other people. You don't know how things are going to work out. You don't know what people are thinking or what people want until you ask them. But you don't have to be pushy about it. It's just about finding out what is going on, because as I've said, this is a time of change, And when you're dealing with a time of change, it's important to be aware of the options, and there are many different options, and you shouldn't rule out any one option because you don't feel that it's sufficiently supported. But the person at the center of it all is, of course, you. And Virgo, at the moment, I think that you do have a fairly strong sense of who you are, and also a strong sense of your own priorities. What does matter to you. Okay, you do know that your priorities could change, so perhaps that's a bit of a contradiction. You have a sense of your priorities, but you also have a sense of how these priorities can shift, because perhaps you've seen it happen in the past. In the past, you might have got really worked up about something, thought it was the most important thing in the world, and then the next day or the next week, everything changes, and you don't quite know what changed, but something did change, and you're following another path. So, deal with that ambiguity, and the ambiguity is between sort of change and commitment. And when we're talking about commitment, of course, I'm talking about commitment to yourself and what is important to you. And Virgo, I would suggest that although I think your social skills are pretty good at the moment, you should avoid making promises and commitments. Now, you could make a promise based on the current state of affairs, the way things are right now. And then a couple of days' time, things could change. And you realize the basis on which you made that promise no longer holds. So I would be very careful about using the word yes. I mean, the word yes is very easy to say. There's no need to give people a flat-out rejection, but maybe rather than yes, you can say maybe. That perhaps could be your approach, but you're not saying maybe because you're just going nowhere, because you can't make up your mind, because you're being indecisive. It's an active decision to say maybe, and it's a mature decision. And what you're saying is that you just don't know, and you shouldn't act on the basis of incomplete information. So, if you can, remember that, then I think that things should work very well. And in general, Virgo, I think that you're going to be, very good at giving a clear account of yourself. So if you say maybe, if you don't commit yourself, you can explain why. And I think that people will understand. Libra. It's perhaps a time when you don't feel that you entirely want to do anything, at least in a public way. And remember that the moon is in Capricorn. The moon is always important for all of the 12 signs, and you're no different. And so, when the moon is in Capricorn, it just feels that you're not ready to take on the world. And this is especially the case when we look at what else is going on. There is this grand trine in water signs, and I will be talking a lot about this grand trine in water signs over the next couple of days. But I don't think that this grand trine in water signs is, for you, going to be particularly dramatic. I think it can be helpful. I think it can allow you to concentrate on some of your ambitions and on your material priorities. But it's not a time when you really have to reveal yourself, and it's just the way it goes. You have to act in accord with the times in which you live. And the times in which you live, I'm talking about that in a very short from a short-term perspective. I'm talking about Monday. I mean, Thursday might be different, but as far as today, Monday, is concerned, you shouldn't allow yourself to be pressurized, not least because it may be difficult to entirely know what is going on. You can try to understand what's happening out there in this complicated world in which we live, but really, the harder you try, the more complex things will become, and perhaps even the more stuck you will become. And why would you be stuck? You're stuck because you don't get it, and it's better that you don't get it than you think you get it, and that is perhaps the real danger. That today, if you make an effort to be outward going, which I think will be probably not the right thing to do, but if you make an effort to be outward going, if you make an effort to give other people a chance, then you might be led to believe something which isn't necessarily true. You could deceive yourself. You could be putting yourself in a position where you allow other people to deceive you. I don't think that they will be deliberately deceiving you, but that might be the end result. So, Libra, I think it's a day for just sticking to what you know and trust, and making sure that everything is in good order. I mean, the moon is making a sextile to the sun, and this moon sextile sun, okay, it's going to be at its strongest if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but I think wherever you are in the world, you're going to be feeling this moon sextile sun, and this moon sextile sun should allow you to get yourself together, and it might have a financial side to it. It could be that you can do something in a way that's just very easy, but it's also sort of quite clever, and it gets someone's attention, and it works out, and perhaps in the end there's some kind of profit for you. I mean, that is a possibility. And what I'm doing here is I'm taking this aspect, moon sextile sun, and I'm trying to make the most of it. I'm not saying it is going to happen like this. The moon sextile sun is a very fast aspect. It doesn't last for very long, but there is an opportunity here, Libra, to somehow make the most of it. But don't be looking for anything spectacular. I don't think you want anything to be spectacular right now, and it's all about living in accord with the planets, with what's going on right now. But the planets aren't everything, and there are other things to consider. And I'm not saying it won't be a spectacular day, but I think all things being equal, it could be rather downbeat. Scorpio. Grand trine in water. I've been talking about grand trines in water signs for a long time, last week or so, but they are important. And Scorpio, you need to be getting ready for this grand trine in water signs involving Mars, which is your ruler. So what is happening is that Mars is starting to make a trine to Jupiter. And I think it's tomorrow that Mars makes that trine. And then Mars moves on and it makes a trine to Saturn. And of course Jupiter and Saturn are trine each other. So your Mars is very much in focus at the moment. And I think that many Scorpios are going to be picking up on this grand trine. And so, over the next few days, make some plans. What would you like to do? How would you like things to work out? And if you have been planning on something, you weren't quite sure when to put it into action, then now might be the time to give it really serious consideration. And it just won't be as difficult as you'd imagined. And with this grand trine, you've got two movements here. You've got the enthusiastic aspect of this grand trine, which you're just about to move into. Mars is trine Jupiter. You thinking about all the things that are possible, all the things that you'd like to do, and having a lot of energy. more energy than you'd realize. But then you want to make sure that it's all stabilized, that whatever you achieve over the next day or two isn't just a sort of flash in the pan, that it can actually remain in your life if you want it to stay in your life. And that's where the Mars trine Saturn comes in. So, really do think about the next few days and what you would like to do. And, with the trouble about a grand trine, I've got a grand trine in my chart. I've got a grand trine in water signs. I've got, what have I got? I've got Venus in Cancer, trine Jupiter in Pisces, trine Neptune in Scorpio. And the trouble about grand trines is that they can be lazy. You can just float around with grand trines and not achieve much. Although this grand trine is perhaps slightly different because Saturn is involved, and perhaps that is very fortunate. Mars trine Jupiter on its own could just be you having big ideas, wanting to do something, and it works well up to a point, and then you just move on, and you're not really bothered with it, and it ends up being a wasted opportunity. But because Saturn is involved, you have a chance to really make something real. But you still have to be aware of the lazy potential of a grand trine, and it would be just easy to drift through the next day or two and really, accomplish very little. And when we're talking about Mars trine Jupiter, we're not just talking about something that is just happy and it's sort of easy. Not necessarily at all. I mean, Mars represents you, Jupiter represents you being activated, and one thing about Scorpio is that there are things that they can become very passionate about, things that may not be directly involved with, or things that are directly related to them. For example, they can be aware of suffering. The suffering may not impact them directly, but they feel it. I mean, Scorpio is a water sign, and things are all connected. And I mean, from a Buddhist perspective, everything is connected, isn't it? Isn't it right? I mean, I'm not a great expert on Buddhism, but I think there is this idea that we can't achieve enlightenment until everything else has achieved enlightenment. I mean, it's something like that. It's not just enlightenment. It's not some sort of personal thing, because it depends on what brand of Buddhism you're involved with. But it's you're part of the whole creative process. And if there's something wrong with the creative process, if someone is suffering, that impacts you. The fact that someone else is behaving badly, someone else is doing something horrible, perhaps on the other side of the world, can link with you, and perhaps that's the sort of the universal compassion that is sometimes associated with Scorpio. And this might be how the Mars trine Jupiter, even the Mars trine Saturn is working, feeling you have to do something, and being aware that maybe in some part of the world there is a tragedy unfolding and no one seems to care about it. It may not be a human tragedy. We kind of get conditioned to thinking just about human tragedies, but that's a very how should we say it? It's what's the word? It's a speciesism, isn't it? Just being completely obsessed about our species and not caring about other species. And we have to think perhaps about the suffering of other animals, the environment. It all gets to you. It all can get to you. And I'm not suggesting, Scorpio, that you get yourself into a situation where you are just completely upset by everything, by the misery of the world. And there is a lot of misery out there, Scorpio. So you've got to filter it through, and you've got to live your life. You've got to enjoy life and act in a way that is reasonable, and be aware of your power and also the limits of your power. So that's perhaps one of the challenges of being a Scorpio. if one takes Scorpio as a sign that is just aware emotionally, uh, that is a great thing, but you can be over aware. And of course, when we're talking about grand trines, we're talking about the filters. We need filters. Without filters, we would go crazy. We need to. We can't just completely perceive, everything. That's not possible. We'd go crazy if that were to happen. So you need to get those filters in order, not be overwhelmed by everything, but at the same time you have that compassion. And maybe at the moment, Scorpio, your compassion may be very important, maybe something that you need to think about, and perhaps you need to get the balance right. Yeah, you have that compassion, but you've also got to think about yourself, and you don't want to go too far in either direction. Sorry, my reading for today is somewhat abstract, but I will be talking more about that, the Grand Trine in water, because right now I think it is very important for you. Sagittarius, you're probably thinking about your own interests. It matters. I mean, you might not like it to matter, but you can't help it, and you do have to. You have to think about yourself. And we have got the moon in Capricorn, and with the moon in Capricorn, well, it's sometimes said that the moon in Capricorn can be a problem because the moon in Capricorn is fallen. It rules Cancer, doesn't work so well in Capricorn, and moon in Capricorn can be a bit selfish, can be thinking about its own interest. But from a Sagittarian perspective, sometimes that is important, and you need to make sure that, for example, you are being paid, if that's appropriate, if you're being sufficiently rewarded for what you do. And so if something doesn't feel right on a financial note, then don't necessarily keep it to yourself. You can do something about it. And the moon is making a sextile to the sun, and so with this moon in Sagittarius sextile the sun in Scorpio, it's possible that you can do things perhaps quite quietly. You don't necessarily have to make a big fuss about it, but you can do things quite quietly, which in the end serve your best interests, but which are also very reasonable. And while this is going on, Sagittarius, I'm not sure that today is a particularly Sagittarian day. Okay, we haven't got any planets in fire signs. It's always good to have planets in fire signs. There are no planets in fire signs, and at the same time, there are things coming to the surface which are starting to bother you ever so slightly, and it could be a frustrating day. You may be aware of the things you would like to do. You'd like to do them very much, but you can't. And the question is, how do you go about doing it? And strangely, this is connected with the Grand Trine. Because if you think about this Grand Trine in water, water signs forming over the next couple of days, you have got Mars trine Jupiter, and you have got Mars trine Saturn. So Jupiter, your ruler, is linked with this Grand Trine. So that means that Jupiter is trine Mars, Jupiter is trine Saturn. I mean, we can put that in different language. We can say Jupiter is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so, strange as it might sound, it's very easy for you to get frustrated. Frustration just comes naturally to you. You just feel that things just are not working. It's obvious that things are not working. You don't even have to think about it. It's just apparent that you can't move. that you can't do anything. But we're talking about the grand trine in water. So that could be your emotional response to a particular situation. You think it can't be done, not possible. And that perhaps highlights an aspect of Sagittarius, and I have to be careful what I say, and I don't want to create a problem where none exists, but there is an association between Sagittarius and depression. And I'm talking when I say depression, I'm not talking about anything clinical or anything like that. Because Sagittarius naturally is a sign that wants action, that wants things to happen. It's a fire sign, and so when that action is not there, when there doesn't seem to be scope for any movement, Sagittarius can get depressed and can feel frustrated. And that might be how this grand trine in water could work at its worst. And you're just feeling it is not possible. And part of the reason you're feeling it's not possible is probably because there's nothing in fire. It's just all about water, having to look at things in an overly emotional way. But Sagittarius, you have to recognize this is a grand trine. Things can move quickly. And so if you feel that you're stuck, that nothing is going on, the reason you might feel stuck is not necessarily because of objective fact. It's about your emotional perceptions of the way things are happening. And if you actually try to make something happen, if you actually do something, you take concrete action, then the grand trine could work in a completely different way. It could actually facilitate action. So don't get caught by your own perceptions. Things really can move, even if you don't think that can possibly happen. So give it a try. And I think that things will improve once Mercury moves into Sagittarius. I think part of the problem is that there's nothing in fire at the moment. And when Mercury moves into Sagittarius, which when does Mercury move into Sagittarius? It's Wednesday. It moves into Sagittarius it moves on Wednesday at 11:02 a.m. Mustn't forget, I think the clocks in the UK, the clocks go back, don't they? Today, things have changed. I'm not when I'm in the UK. I just sort of forgotten. But you've got to remember. I'm just so used to the summertime that I sort of get caught by it, at least in the northern hemisphere. Anyway, Mercury is going to go. Mercury is moving into Sagittarius on Wednesday, and I think that that's going to make things much easier. And I think that this grand trine is going to start to work perhaps in a different way. And I think perhaps with this grand trine, you're going to start to see the positive side of it. Things really can move for you. And so if you do feel negative, then try to do something. Try to create something. And you might be just surprised when you notice that things aren't anything like as bad as they seem to be on the surface. Capricorn. Moon is still moving through your sign, and it doesn't do a great deal in Capricorn. It does make a sextile to the sun, but that's very early in the day if you're in the Americas. So it's that moon sextile sun. You may not feel its direct impact in the Americas. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon is in Capricorn, definitely making that sextile to the sun. It's exact, in the middle of the day, but still, the moon is in Capricorn, Sun is in Scorpio. Capricorn and Scorpio, they have a good relationship to one another, and so that means for you, Capricorn, that wherever you are, things look fine. You're feeling good about yourself. You're feeling that you're, by and large, in control, that there's nothing really, holding you up. There's nothing particularly exciting going on to really move you on to the next level. But, that's okay. You're comfortable with the situation, and you don't have to struggle, too hard. And by the way, the moon in Capricorn is making a square to Venus. And okay, I think that this moon square Venus, may not be exact today, depends on your time zone, but the fact that you've got moon in Capricorn, Venus in Libra, that is good. Even if that moon Venus square is not exact. And the reason it's good, Capricorn, is because it allows you to project yourself, and it allows you to make the most of Venus in Libra. Venus is not going to stay in Libra forever, and you want to make the most of it before it moves into Scorpio. And Venus in Libra is about what you want to do. It's about how you present yourself. Presenting yourself in such a way that people are prepared to listen to you, follow your lead. And so with moon in Capricorn, perhaps you have a certain sense of your own best interests and what you would like to do. And the moon square Venus perhaps allows you to transmit this in a way that is harmonious and is reasonable. So, you might be very selfish. You might be only thinking about yourself and what's important to you. But if you want to message that, it comes over in such a way that it seems that everyone can benefit. And also, Capricorn, at the moment, your ability to talk in a positive, enthusiastic way is pretty good. And you have to remember, Capricorn, quite a few people are feeling rather uncertain about it at the moment. They're just not sure what's going on. And, they have their doubts. And they need someone like you to show them or tell them that everything is going to be okay. They need someone like you to talk about the future. Even if you yourself are not entirely positive about the future, even if you have your doubts, it doesn't matter. The things you say can be very uplifting. And if you come across people who are down in the dumps, who have their doubts, then you're just the person to cheer them up. Aquarius. There are things, Aquarius, that perhaps should be hidden. You don't have to be open and honest if you don't want to be. Some things you're still working them through, and you don't want to tell everyone about it, and that's in keeping with you as an Aquarius. You have lots of ideas, you have lots of plans, but sometimes they can't be discussed. Perhaps you want to keep them secret for your own personal reasons. You think that maybe someone will steal your ideas. That's one possibility. Or perhaps you'll be of a view that people won't understand. If you told people what you really wanted, then they just wouldn't get it. Now, arguably, the main thing going on right now is this grand trine in water signs involving Mars. And Mars is making a trine to Jupiter, and it's starting to make a trine to Saturn. So that is very relevant, of course, because Saturn is your ruler. So a few days' time, you've got Mars making the exact trine. And so if you think about what Mars is doing, Mars makes the trine to Jupiter, then it moves on to Saturn. So you could say that Mars sort of picks up the energy of Jupiter and then transfers it onto Saturn. And so that process for you, Aquarius, I would have said is really positive. And this grand trine can really help you to get your act together. I'm sure you've already got your act together, but really move things perhaps to a new level, and things can be easy. Yeah, easy. That's what trines are about. You don't have to put in as much energy as perhaps you thought you needed to. And if you are focused, you have something you really want, then I think that this grand trine can really help you to achieve it. So Aquarius, think about this week. Think about how you'd like things to be by Friday. And obviously you've got to be reasonable. You've got to think about what is possible, but think about what you would like to happen, what you know can happen if you give it your best shot. And then I think that this grand trine can really help you. And the key thing, or one of the key things with this grand trine, is to remember that it's in water signs. And because it's in water signs, there is a possibility that it works too much under the surface. I just said, at the beginning of this piece, that there are things you want to keep secret. And that's good. I mean, some things do need to be kept secret. But there's a problem here if this persists. Because if you keep everything secret, if you're afraid of revealing things, then it stays in your mind. It remains just something very subjective that has no expression in the real world. And so that would be a terrible shame. And so if you have something important that you want to offer, you want to make it happen, you can't keep it secret forever. And certainly by the time the moon moves into Aquarius, okay, the moon is now in Capricorn, but by the time the moon moves into Aquarius, which is in a day or two's time, you must be ready perhaps to be a lot more open and to be absolutely clear about what you want and how you want to achieve it, because you can really make things happen at the moment. And I'm thinking especially on the material level. I know that sounds rather boring and rather uninspiring, but don't neglect the material level. It's easy to drift off on your own ideas and your own fantasies, and feeling that your own private world is where everything should happen. But it's not just about that. And so really do think about it, and in the end be able to talk about it. And again, I talked about secrets and the fact that some things need to be kept secret, but not everything needs to be kept secret. And in fact, Aquarius, if you really do make the effort, I don't even know if you have to make any effort. If you tell people what's on your mind, if you listen to them, and if you show that you're interested in what they've got to say, as well as telling them what you believe, then your ability to talk and create some kind of a conversation. I mean a real conversation, not in that kind of fake kind of way. I want to be part of the conversation. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a real conversation where you talk about something important with another person, and you're going to be good at that, and there's going to be something about you which is uplifting. You might not appear to be uplifting, you might not appear to be enthusiastic, but once you're involved with another person, you can really make things happen, and you can be a force for good. Pisces, we are in a situation where there is quite a lot of water. It's all starting to happen. And we've got this grand trine in water signs forming. And this grand trine in water signs is, of course, important to you, because we've got Mars trine Jupiter, Mars trine Saturn. Jupiter, is, of course, your ruler. And so I think it's very important, Pisces, that you absolutely make the most of this. I mean, I know I'm repeating myself, but this Mars trine Jupiter, Mars trine Saturn is arguably one of the most important configurations of the year. It doesn't happen that often. I mean, Jupiter and Saturn are in trine. Okay, the trine isn't exact until next year, but Mars and Jupiter's trine is a fairly unusual event. And when Mars makes that trine, it becomes very special, and it becomes very special for a Pisces because it's in water signs. Yeah, you get Mars and Jupiter trines, but they're not always in water signs. This Mars Jupiter trine that's in water signs. But likewise with Jupiter Saturn trine, this Jupiter Saturn trine, which is, again, it's not exact, and by the time the Jupiter Saturn trine does become exact next year, I believe Jupiter and Saturn will not be in water signs. So this is as good as it gets. And so I would really suggest, Pisces, that you do take advantage of it. And in terms of your plans for the week, you do think about it. You think about what you can do to really make the most of what is something that is really, very energetic and easy. I mean, that's the key thing about grand trines. They're easy. And so Mars starting to make a trine to Jupiter, you're in a position to really make things happen, and things can happen at quite a high level. I mean, there is a spiritual side to Mars trine Jupiter. And I will be talking more about Mars trine Jupiter tomorrow, but I'm just reminding you that this Mars trine Jupiter is almost exact. So think about how far you'd like to go, and don't limit yourself. Explore new ideas, new possibilities, and once you've explored these ideas, as you, I hope, will discover in a few days' time, the aspect to Saturn will allow you to stabilize things, make something real, make it permanent. I mean, that's what you want, because Pisces can move from one thing to another. You go with the tide, and you enjoy something one moment, then the tide comes along and you're swept somewhere else. But sometimes you just have to stop where you are. You have to anchor yourself and say, this works, this is good, I enjoy doing this, this is part of my destiny, so I want to hang around here. And that is something that you need to be thinking about, with this, as this grand trine in water, builds up. And don't be too negative. There is a feeling of negativity with this grand trine. And I was explaining this to Sagittarius because, like Sagittarius, have Jupiter as your ruler. And the issue here is that with this grand trine, we have Jupiter trining Mars, Jupiter trine Saturn. So that means that Jupiter is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And there are a number of ways of looking at Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And the first thing you might feel as this grand trine becomes exact is to feel that you're not good enough. You haven't got what it takes. And that would be completely untrue. But if you do find yourself doubting yourself, just say, oh, well, it's just Jupiter's on the Mars-Saturn, Jupiter's on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. You're going to feel like that, perhaps. And you might even feel a bit frustrated. But, why might you feel frustrated? Because you're not actually putting things to the test. And if you actually make the effort to try, then you'll be able to break through your frustrations. And there's another way of looking at Mars-Saturn, by the way. Mars-Saturn can be, on a positive note, can be about hard work, really pushing yourself. And if you start pushing yourself with this grand trine in water signs, well, things should move very quickly. So, I'm quite optimistic about this grand trine, and I will be talking a lot more about this grand trine in water signs, over the next few days. So that's it with the 12 signs, and now it is time to look at things from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 12, which is standstill. It doesn't look too good, does it? And if you just look at that hexagram, it kind of looks all wrong. It's top heavy. You've got the top trigram, the sort of the heavenly trigram. All of the lines are unbroken. It's at the top. Heaven has shut the door on the world, and then you've got the bottom trigram, 3 broken lines. So everything is disconnected. There is no flow, and things are not moving. And that might be the way you start the day. We feel that we'd like things to be moving, but everything is stuck. So our first impressions of the day might be rather negative. However, we have 2 moving lines, and the bottom line moves and the fourth line moves. So the bottom line moving means that we should basically take the view that, different people have different approaches. We have our views, other people have their views. That's the way it is. Now, if other people are not doing anything, they're feeling negative, that's fine. But we have our own perspective, and our own perspective might be unique. But what the bottom line talks about is pulling up grass. And when you pull up grass, you're not just little blades of grass, but you pull up a whole strip of grass. And it's all these pieces of grass are connected with this fine sort of root system. And that might be about, birds of a feather flock together. That there are different people with different attitudes, but there are people who have the same attitude. They're like those blades of grass, they're connected together. And so that's your view. You are going with one group of people, one view, and let everyone else go their way. You may be the only blade of grass, but it's talking about isolation. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with this bottom line moving. I'm not saying it is particularly fortunate, but we just have to an extent isolate ourselves, separate ourselves. But if we find other people who are on the same wavelength as us, that's fine. That is, of course, reassuring. But again, the attitude is, if you're not interested, fair enough, you go your separate ways. If you want to see the world in a particular way, that's fine. I'm not going to persuade you. And that might be the best way of dealing with this standstill. And I think that although the hexagram, sounds bad, I don't think in this case it actually is. And then the fourth line moves. So the fourth line, if you look at where the fourth line lies, you've got the bottom three lines, and then you've got the transition between the third line and the fourth line to the upper part of the hexagram. And this is perhaps a transitional line. It's suggesting that the period of standstill is over, or is starting to be over. And we find, for example, that we start getting recognition. We thought that recognition wasn't going to happen, but it is happening. And we are starting to make progress. Yeah, things are still slow, but each of us has our own position. We have our own set of talents. Maybe we have our own destiny. Maybe it's even a calling. And so we are being pulled in that direction. And if we hold true to who we are and what we're good at, then we will eventually be recognized. And this hexagram standstill does shift, because we've got two moving lines. It shifts to a second hexagram, and it shifts to hexagram number 42, which is increase. So in spite of the day perhaps starting off quite badly, with increase, that does indicate that things will improve. Whatever we're working on, we make the most of it. It improves. It gets better. And so I think that overall it is a day that just gets better as it goes along. And we should not be fooled by the beginning of the day where it just seems that everything is really stuck, but it needn't be stuck. And if we focus on what we're good at, our qualities, and we allow everyone to go their different ways. If other people don't want to do what we want to do, that's fine. But in the end, we'll find our niche, and we'll find recognition, enough recognition. I'm not saying we're going to be a star today, but we'll get the recognition we deserve. We deserve no more and no less. And then we get this hexagram of increase. So there is an overall improvement, and we get more of stuff. So increase, okay, it could be a financial increase, but it may be increase in terms of just our knowledge, and perhaps we'll learn something, or there might be an extra experience that we can find to be useful. So overall, it looks a good day, but I don't think at the beginning it might not seem to be a good day. And I want to finish by looking at the horoscope of John Cleese, who is 86 today. And I mean, the reason I go for John Cleese, it's his birthday. So because it's his birthday, that's a good reason to talk about his horoscope, and perhaps gives us a break from politics. And the advantage of John Cleese is that I think a lot of people know about him. He's not just a British comedian and actor. He's known around the world. So I don't have to say too much about him. And I mean, I'm not a great expert on John Cleese, but like everyone, I've watched Monty Python and I've watched Life of Brian, and so forth. So let's start off by looking at his horoscope, and he is a Scorpio. So where's his chart gone? Unfortunately, with John Cleese, we do have a time of birth. So he was born at 3:15 a.m. in Western Supermare. So, when you think about the sign Scorpio, you don't necessarily associate the sign Scorpio with being a comedian. I mean, although Scorpio would represent a particular type of humor, you would have think if it was Scorpio and humor. Well, Scorpio and humor might represent a darker form of humor, perhaps being able to laugh at things which other people can't. And he has got Sun in Scorpio square Pluto, so it's kind of appropriate that where there is a Sun square Pluto. Well, we do have Sun square Pluto in the sky at the moment, and he has Sun in Pluto. He's got so Pluto is now in Aquarius, so he's got his Pluto opposition Pluto at the moment. So Sun square Pluto, you might say that he's a serious person, and I think that didn't John Cleese he went into psychotherapy? Didn't he write about psychotherapy and the experience of psychotherapy at one stage? I think that was quite a long time ago, but that might be Sun square Pluto. So perhaps this is someone who is interested in the psychology of things, not just his own psychology, but perhaps the collective psychology. And Sun square Pluto is someone who is very persistent, just stays around. He's always there. And of course, of all the people in Monty Python, I would guess that he has the highest profile. He has stayed around, and so Sun square Pluto might indicate also, but he does have strong beliefs. And if you look at John Cleese's sort of Wikipedia page, he's always been involved in sort of particular causes. I mean, for example, there was a time, I think, was it in the 80s, when he did a lot of work for Amnesty International. What was it? The Secret Policeman's Ball. I don't really know much about it, but it was this sort of comedy show trying to raise money for Amnesty International, I think, and raise awareness of human rights violations. And he's been involved with political parties in the past. I think if you're in the UK, if you'll perhaps remember the SDP. So he did a political broadcast of the SDP. So he has a political side to him. And of course, now he's campaigned against. I don't know about campaign is the right word, but he's made it very clear that he doesn't really approve of this sort of woke cancel culture, and how it's having such a bad effect on comedy. And one of the episodes of Fawlty Towers relating to the Germans, how the BBC had cancelled it, and he or has made it not available anymore. I certainly remember that the episode on the Germans, that was quite famous. And so he's clearly a person who has a strong set of beliefs, and I think that perhaps relates to the Scorpio element of his chart. That he has Sun, Venus, and Mercury in Scorpio. But there is another side to his chart. There is the fire in his chart, and he has Jupiter at 0 degrees Aries. I mean, Jupiter at 0 degrees Aries, I mean, that is a very strong place for Jupiter. Jupiter is on the Aries point. The Aries point is about the world. It's not just about individuals. It's not about connecting to people at a one-to-one level. It's something very global. And so as a comedian, he's able to have a global appeal. He's not just some obscure British comedian. He's able to break beyond what's going on in Britain, as I suppose all of the Monty Python team were able to do. But that Jupiter in Aries is particularly fortunate, I think. And it's in the 8th house, though, so there is an intensity to that Jupiter in Aries as well, which is a reminder that it is an intense chart. And it's a very opinionated Jupiter. Jupiter is a planet with a moral code. It has beliefs. This is right, this is wrong. And his Jupiter is semi-square Mars. So Mars is not exact, it's pretty close to the semi-square of Mars. So, as you know, I regard semi-squares as being very important. So Mars semi-square Jupiter is perhaps the ability to go over the top, to take things to their absolute limit. And Mars and Jupiter Mars semi-square Jupiter can be outspoken, and certainly John Cleese has been outspoken. Even though he's now he's just turned 86. He's certainly been very outspoken in his views on cancel culture. And has he been cancelled himself? I'm not sure, but he is an opinionated man, and I think that this Mars semi-square Jupiter has really, had an impact there. And that's not the only planet he has in Aries. He's got the Moon and Saturn in Aries. Now that Saturn, on its own, is a problematic Saturn. I mean, Saturn is fallen there. I mean, Saturn is exalted in Libra, so it's fallen in Aries. So it perhaps is something of a problem in certain areas of his life. Although you also have to remember that anyone born in the sort of 1939 run then would have Saturn in Aries. So you can't have sort of a whole generation who is sort of cursed by having Saturn in Aries. I mean, he has to deal with it, in his own way. So that may say something about aspects of his life, maybe his personal life, which haven't always worked out with Saturn in Aries. And he's got Moon conjunct Saturn. And okay, you could say that Moon conjunct Saturn is quite wide. I mean, it's over 8 degrees apart, but still, I mean, the Moon and Saturn in the same sign, Moon moving towards a conjunction of Saturn. Of course, if you're talking about comedy, there is something completely Saturnine about comedy. Don't forget, Saturn rules clans. That's sort of an interesting thing. But traditionally, that's always been said. So the Moon conjunct Saturn, it just contributes to the seriousness of his chart. It is a serious chart, and as far as the comedy is concerned, what is the signature of a comedian? There probably isn't one. I mean, many comedians have their sun in Sagittarius, but he doesn't have his sun in Sagittarius. But I think that Mars semi-square Jupiter really is quite important. And additionally, we can see how that Mars Jupiter works when we look at his midpoints. So if you're talking about someone's career, you want to know about someone's career, you would look at the midheaven and you would look at aspects to the midheaven. Okay, he's got the midheaven in Gemini. Okay, 1 in 12 people have their midheaven in Gemini. That doesn't necessarily tell us a great deal. Okay, you could say in a general sense, if you've got midheaven in Gemini, you are looking for some kind of variety. I think he got a law degree from Cambridge, but he never practiced law. But he was looking for something else, something different. But I think that is pretty vague to talk about. Just he's got Gemini on the midheaven, and so what I would be looking at then is what midpoints is his midheaven on. So if we look at his 90-degree dial, this can be a useful exercise. Looking at if you're looking at someone's career, someone's not sure about their career, seeing what midpoints perhaps the midheaven is on. So as we've got a timed birth, okay, he's born at 3:15. So okay, it's not going to be exactly 3:15, but it's good enough. And so if we put his midheaven on the pointer, there is his Mars-Jupiter semi-square. So he's got a Mars-Jupiter semi-square. On the 90-degree dial, a semi-square and a sesquiquadrate will come out as an opposition. So on a 90-degree dial, he's got a Mars-Jupiter opposition. But his midheaven is on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. It's also on the Mars-Aries midpoint. And so you could say, with midheaven on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, that says something about his line of work. And that Mars-Jupiter semi-square in his chart is going to be an integral part of how he manifests in the world. And of course, his persona sort of in the Monty Python as someone who is, and of course Fawlty Towers in particular, is someone who is quite aggressive, someone who is like Basil Fawlty, being pretty obnoxious and having all sorts of prejudices. And you could say that Basil Fawlty was a really quite Mars-Jupiter character in a certain way, because of perhaps the exaggerated behavior, the exaggerated insults, and there is his midheaven on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, which I think is probably the most important thing in his chart. And then I just quickly want to look at the first episode of Monty Python, while we're on the subject of John Cleese, which must have been quite an important point for his career. So Monty Python launched for the Monty Python's Flying Circus. Its first episode was Sunday, October the 5th, 1969 at 10:55 p.m. And this is the chart for it. And perhaps what is striking about the chart is the fact that Mercury is conjunct Uranus. I mean, that completely describes it. Mercury on the Aries point, conjunct Uranus. And remember, John Cleese has his Jupiter at 0 degrees Aries, and he's got his Mars at 15 degrees Aquarius. So Mercury was opposition his Jupiter and was sesquiquadrate his Mars. So Mercury is triggering it. And yeah, there's a Mercury-Uranus conjunction in the chart, and I think that very much describes Monty Python and what it was doing. This sort of offbeat humor. Don't forget, this is 1969, and so that was a long time ago, and it was challenge. It was challenging the status quo as it existed in 1969. I mean, some of the jokes might not be. One might not understand them now, but you have to think about the late 60s, and so Mercury-Uranus is perhaps the key thing. And interestingly, we've got a moon sextile Sun today on Monday, October 27th, and Monty Python launched, or at least it aired for the first time, with the moon sextile Sun. So there is a moon in Leo, sextile with Sun in Libra, and I always say that a moon sextile sun is a fortunate aspect, particularly if it's applying. So if you are starting a new project, it would be good to have moon sextile the sun. And in this case, there was certainly, if we set this chart for London, I think Cancer would have been rising across the UK, pretty much all over the UK. It's a slow moving sign, Cancer. So when it aired, Cancer was rising. The ruler of Cancer is the moon, and the moon is making a sextile to the sun. I mean, what could be better? It's a fortunate aspect, and if you want to maximize your chances of success, having that moon sextile sun, it really must have helped. So that's it. I don't really have a great deal to say about John Cleese and Monty Python, perhaps because I don't know a huge amount about them. But I think that most of you will have heard of John Cleese, so I think he's a character who it's quite easy to relate to. I don't really have to say a lot about. But I think if you're looking at John Cleese's chart, it's perhaps not entirely what one would expect from a comedian at first sight. But then John Cleese is a particular type of comedian. He certainly has his own views, and I think that is really expressed in his horoscope. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.